Some monsters become less frightening the more you learn about them. Their motives, their history, their weaknesses. Eventually, they stop feeling like monsters and start feeling like characters. But Slenderman never gives you that comfort. Slender the Arrival begins with absence. Empty roads, silent forces, abandoned homes. Nothing announces that you're in danger, yet everything feels wrong. The game never rushes to explain what you're seeing because exploration isn't the point. Slenderman isn't terrifying because of what he does. He's terrifying because your mind can never fully understand what he is. And that's where the horror begins. Human beings are prediction machines. Every single second, your brain is making thousands of unconscious predictions about the world around you. It predicts where a sound comes from, what someone is about to say, how far an object is, and whether an unfamiliar shape is dangerous or harmless. Most of the time, these predictions are so accurate that you never even notice them happening. Reality feels stable because your mind is consistently proving itself right. And Slenderman completely disrupts that system. He doesn't move according to normal rules. Sometimes he's close, sometimes he's impossibly far away. Sometimes you turn around and he's standing where nothing existed only seconds before. He never explains himself, and he never behaves consistently enough to become predictable. And he never gives your brain enough information to classify him. Instead of solving a puzzle, your mind keeps creating new possibilities, trying desperately to reduce uncertainty. That endless search is exhausting. The fear isn't just seeing Slenderman, it's realizing that your brain can never settle on an explanation. Psychologists sometimes describe uncertainty as one of the strongest amplifiers of anxiety. A known danger can be prepared for, but an unknown one cannot. It's why stuff like hearing footsteps outside of your bedroom at night is more frightening than knowing exactly who's there. The mind hates unfinished information because unfinished information keeps survival systems active. Slenderman exists entirely inside that unfinished space. He never becomes understandable, and because he never becomes understandable, your nervous system never receives permission to relax. Most horror monsters announce themselves through violence. They scream, chase, attack, and force the player into immediate survival. Slenderman does something much more quieter. Most of the time, he simply just watches. Psychologically, observation has always carried enormous weight. Long before modern civilization, realizing something unseen was watching you often meant that you've already lost the advantage. Evolution favored nervous systems that treated unexplained observation as a serious threat. Even today, people instinctively change their posture, their behavior, and decisions when they believe they're being watched. Surveillance changes behavior long before it causes harm. Slenderman weaponizes that instinct the moment you know he exists. You stop paying attention to the environment because you're constantly asking yourself if I've missed him already. Every camera movement becomes a ritual. Every glance over your shoulder becomes compulsory. Eventually, the game accomplished something remarkable. It convinces you to police your own attention. Slenderman barely needs to act because your own hypervigilance becomes the real antagonist. The fear is no longer located in the monster, it's located in the way your own mind begins functioning after you've seen him. Like almost every horror game, Slender the Arrival gives you objectives. Find the pages, restore the generators, reach the next location. But on the surface, these goals exist to give the player purpose. They create the comforting illusion that progress is possible, that if you simply complete enough tasks, you'll eventually regain control of the situation. It's a structure we've been taught by games our entire lives. Complete the objective, overcome the obstacle, and move forward. But in Slender the Arrival, it quietly twists that explanation into something much more darker. Every objective you complete doesn't bring relief, it makes the world more hostile. Every page collected strengthens Slenderman's presence. Every generator you activate increases the tension. Every step towards success also becomes a step towards greater vulnerability. The game conditions you to keep moving because standing still feels impossible. Yet moving forward is exactly what brings you closer to the thing you're trying to escape. Progress and punishment becomes inseparable. This mirrors what psychologists called learned helplessness, a state where effort no longer reliably improves outcomes. Humans are wired to believe that actions should produce meaningful results. When that relationship begins to break down, anxiety starts replacing confidence. Eventually, you stop believing that your choices matter at all. That's what makes Slender the Arrival so unsettling. It isn't taking control away from you immediately, it's convincing you little by little that control may have never existed in the first place. By the end, you're no longer asking, how do I survive? You're asking something much more frightening. Did I ever have a chance? One of the darkest ideas in The Arrival is that Slenderman doesn't simply kill people, he changes them. His influence spreads long before anybody dies. The people who encounter him begin losing pieces of themselves. Their perception changes, their memory becomes unreliable, isolation deepens, and reality slowly becomes something they can no longer confidently distinguish from fear. By the time they physically confront Slenderman, the psychological damage has already been done, and Katie's story reflects this process almost perfectly. She isn't destroyed in a single moment of violence, she deteriorates gradually. Fear reshapes the way she sees the world until the world itself no longer feels trustworthy. She withdraws, becomes increasingly disconnected from reality, and eventually exists more as an extension of Slenderman's influence than as a person she once was. The game suggests that the real transformation isn't physical, it's cognitive. The mind changes first, and then everything else follows. And Charlie's disappearance pushes this even further. Children are often associated with innocence, imagination, and safety, but Slender the Arrival strips away all three. Charlie isn't frightening because he's a victim, he's frightening because his disappearance demonstrates that fear doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care about age, morality, or innocence. Slender's presence behaves almost like an infection, not because it spreads biologically, but because it spreads psychologically. Once uncertainty enters somebody's perception, it begins changing how they interpret everything around them. Fear becomes contagious, moving from person to person through memory, behavior, and belief, until entire lives begin revolving around something that no one can fully explain. Most horror games eventually reward the player with understanding. You learn how the monster behaves, you discover its weakness, you uncover hidden lore that explains why everything happened. Knowledge gradually replaces fear because understanding gives the brain structure. Once something makes sense, it becomes manageable. Even if it's still dangerous, it no longer feels unknowable. But Slender the Arrival refuses to give you that relief. The more time you spend with the game, the less certainty you actually gain. Slenderman never becomes fully understandable because the game deliberately avoids turning him into a puzzle that can be solved. Sure, there are theories, there are interpretations, but there is never enough information to satisfy the mind's need for closure. Every answer produces another question, leaving the psychological tension unresolved from beginning to end. That's what makes the horror linger after you stop playing. Jump scares disappear almost immediately. Violent imagery fades with time, but unresolved uncertainty doesn't. The brain keeps searching for patterns long after the experience is over. Replaying scenes, questioning details, trying to force the meaning onto something designed to resist explanation. In many ways, Slender the Arrival never actually ends. It simply stops giving you new information while your own mind continues trying to finish the story on its own. That's why Slenderman remains unsettling years after. The game ends, but the uncertainty doesn't. At its core, Slender the Arrival isn't about a faceless creature hiding somewhere in the woods. It's about what happens when the human mind loses its ability to predict reality. Certainty is one of the foundations of emotional stability. Every day, your brain builds invisible models of how the world works. You expect gravity to behave constantly. You expect people to move logically. You expect spaces to remain familiar and time to move forward. These assumptions allow you to navigate life without constantly questioning every experience. Slender the Arrival slowly dismantles those assumptions one by one, and Slenderman represents the collapse of predictability. He isn't frightening because of violence, he isn't frightening because of his appearance, he's frightening because he cannot be integrated into any stable understanding of reality. But the mind keeps reaching toward him, desperate to make sense of what it's seeing, and every attempt fails. And that failure produces anxiety that never fully resolved because uncertainty itself has become permanent. In that sense, Slenderman is less a monster than an idea. He represents every unanswered question the mind refuses to let go of. Like every fear that grows stronger simply because it cannot be explained, or every moment where reality feels just unstable enough that you begin questioning your own perception instead of the world around you. And maybe that's why Slenderman became such a cultural phenomenon. Not because people believed he was real, but because the feeling he represents. We've all experienced moments where the world suddenly feels unfamiliar. We've all had those moments where your brain tells you something is wrong even though you can't explain why. And Slender the Arrival takes that feeling and stretches it into an entire world. I think the reason Slender the Arrival has endured for so many years isn't because of its story, isn't because of its gameplay, and isn't because Slenderman is the most powerful monster in horror, or whatever. It's because the game understands something fundamental about the human mind. We are far more disturbed by uncertainty than certainty. We can survive almost any truth, no matter how terrifying it is, but uncertainty lingers. It keeps the mind awake. It keeps us searching. It convinces us that there's always one more answer just beyond our reach. That's exactly what Slenderman becomes. Not a creature hiding in the trees, but the feeling that something is wrong, even when you can't prove it. Long after you finish the game, the forest stops existing, the pages disappear, the flashlight goes dark, but the uncertainty stays with you. Because the real horror was never standing in between the trees, it was realizing that your own mind will never stop looking for him.